Hey, what's going on, Los Angeles? Welcome into another edition of the number one Rams show in Los Angeles. Self-proclaimed number one Rams show in Los Angeles. The Rams Skinny here on the LA Football Network, live on the mightier 1090 ESPN Radio. Thank you, as always, for tuning in, whether you're on YouTube. Rams LAFB is our YouTube page. Check that out. If you're on the website, LAFBnetwork.com, thank you for that. If you're on Apple, Spotify, Google Play, wherever you get your podcasts and you've searched Rams Skinny, thank you for putting us in your headphones. And if you turn that dial to 1090 in your car, we certainly appreciate being a part of your commute home, commute to work, if you work nights, whatever it may be. If you're in an Uber going out to dinner or party, thanks for tuning in. So excited to talk about some breaking news with the Rams. As expected, the great DC Raheem Morris getting a head coaching job with the Atlanta Falcons. We'll get all into that, talk about some potential DC replacements, talk about what the staff could look like if Raheem Morris takes them with him. Plus, I'm sure we'll come up with some other stuff as we get going. But first and foremost, my co-host with the mostest, Mr. Ryan Skinny T. Anderson, looking fresh as always, little 5 o'clock shadow going on. Happy Friday, brother. It's a beautiful day here in Los Angeles. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, man. It's good to be back, and it's nice to have some news to talk about. It's not great news for the Rams, but it's news regardless.
I know, we're so spoiled. Like, we go a week without news, and it's like, oh, we got some news to talk about. Like, think if you're like, I don't even know a team off the top of my head that just like they get nothing year round. It's just like a blank slate to talk about. So, but we're spoiled out here in LA, and spoiled that I get to do it with you. So, before I jump into it, our friends at Underdog Fantasy are a big part of why we can do this show. Make sure to go to underdogfantasy.com or download the Underdog Fantasy app. When you go to make your first time deposit, use our promo code RAMS LAFB. That's all one word, RAMS LAFB. Gets you a welcome bonus up to $100. Put in 100, you get $100 free to play with. Ton of fun. Pick 2 to 5 players across any sport, any game. You're just choosing the over-unders. You know, if we're talking football, you're picking Brock Purdy, over-under, passing yards, over-under, touchdowns, and you can win up to 25x your money, even more than that if you're playing with the chili peppers, as we like to say. A little harder to win, but hey, you can win a lot more, up to 100x, basically. So, putting $5, you can turn that into a pretty purse if you do it right. Underdog Fantasy, promo code RAMSLAFB. Tell them the guys at the Rams Skinny sent you. Skinny T, it's a weird feeling. It's a somber day losing the great Raheem Morris. But it was expected. Me and you both were pretty adamant that he would get a job. It started looking a little bleaker with only 3 teams left, and it seemed like the Falcons were kind of in on Belichick, seemed like the Seahawks were kind of in on Dan Quinn, and it seemed like the Commanders were awaiting Ben Johnson from the Lions. So it was starting to seem a little off, but me and you both thought through this whole process that the Falcons were probably the number 1 best fit. The Commanders were probably number 2. That's kind of, if I remember right, what we were saying all along. And so extremely happy for Raheem. It's well-deserved. We'll get into reaction, fan reaction, player reactions, all that. But what was your reaction first when it actually did break that he did officially get, the head coaching gig?
Yeah, I was. You were actually the one that broke it to me. I was busy doing something else, and you told me that it had happened. So, I mean, my reaction was, I'm incredibly happy for Raheem Morris to get another opportunity. It's been 15 years since he's been a head coach in the league, and just paying his dues and spending time just on staffs and really earning his way back into the good graces of the NFL community. And it's nice that he's going to a familiar place where they know him, he knows them. And yeah, just great news for him. And, it's always exciting when you want to replace somebody, for the Rams. So, it's an exciting time for on both sides. So, I'm, all the dominoes start falling, that's when the coaches start getting hired. And one of the interesting things I think is happening is there was kind of a trend to go get, the scheme lords, the young geniuses of the league. And now it's starting to go more back towards the CEO types with Harbaugh. Mm-hmm. and not that Raheem is a CEO type, but he is much more, he's not one of those young geniuses, the Brandon Staley's, the Arthur Smiths. And, there's always a reaction when a team fires a guy. They kind of go equal and opposite reaction to that.
Mm-hmm.
So Chargers go get Harbaugh, and this is just another thing where it's they're looking for a guy that's going to steady the ship, and they're going defense this time, which is cool. For a long time the NFL was going offensive play caller head coaches. Now a lot of defensive coordinators getting the nod. So really interesting trends that this kind of signals towards.
Yeah, it's as you said, his leadership qualities, I think, are what he good play caller. Obviously, did a phenomenal job leading this Rams defense and calling the defense this year overall. But I think what everyone talks about is his leadership qualities, his infectious character and integrity, his gravitational pull, as a lot of people described his aura around the Rams organization. And so when you see that and you notice that, that's someone you want leading your football team. And, as long as he hires a good staff, I think they'll be really good down there in Atlanta, which we'll get to, here in a minute, and kind of what that could potentially shape out like. But yeah, extremely happy for him. Very happy he went to Atlanta, not Seattle. Would have been a bummer to have to see him twice a year. You hate when you see coaches or players leave and go to a division rival. So glad he's, in the NFC still, but hey, Atlanta, they're across the country. We can root for Atlanta. No problem with that. I know a bunch of guys that do Atlanta podcasts, so I'll make sure to reach out and try to have them get you on their show so you can break down Raheem Morris to their audience and, what he'll do to their team. But yeah, I think he's going to be great, and it's well deserved. And, it's funny. A lot of people that didn't, and now I want to get your take on this, Skinny. A lot of people that didn't follow the Rams closely or didn't know Raheem Morris. I believe we even had, some chatter out here in LA that maybe weren't necessarily Rams fans, but just other fans of teams. And it was like, man, I don't know about that hire. Like he was a really bad first time head coach, yada, yada, this, yada, yada, that. And it's the dude went 10-6 with Josh Freeman as his quarterback. And I know they kind of fell apart then after that. But B, like, it's weird that we still in this day and age, for some instances, it's like we have no memory, right? Like, what did you do for me yesterday? When we talk about players specifically, all of a sudden, we see a quarterback that's been mediocre or bad his whole career, has one good year. One example being Geno Smith. All of a sudden, everyone's thinking Geno Smith is a top 8 quarterback in football. Comes back down to earth and it's like, okay, that's what he was. But so it's like players, everyone forgets, like, oh no, they're different. But with coaches, like, well, he failed 8 years ago or whatever. And so, no, he won't be a good head coach now. And it's like, how how much you learn and improve and grow and being in different systems. He was a head coach in Tampa, then went to Atlanta, and then he was in LA, coaching under a bunch of different coaches in that time. And I think of someone else, this is off topic, but like Dan Quinn, everyone's like, oh, well, Dan Quinn, failed as a head coach in Atlanta. It's like, well, yeah, and then you go learn and you improve and you get better. And so it's just funny how with players, the talk always forgets that a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times, everyone's shielded by the, what are you doing right now? But with coaches, it's like that stigma lasts with them for so long. Like, what's your thoughts on that?
No, it's really interesting. And I think that the coaches do learn things along the way. And I mean, especially as far back as you have to go to get to the last time Raheem Morris was a head coach of a team. He coached the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but you got to even look situationally. You think about, Bill Belichick was a head coach before he was the Patriots head coach. Mm-hmm. Coached the Cleveland Browns. What a terrible situation, know. And you think, he lands Pete Carroll as well. Exactly. 100%. So the situation that Morris was in when he was in Tampa Bay was not great. I mean, he was incredibly young. He's 47 now. So he's in his early 30s. Does that sound right? Anyway.
Yeah. Something like that.
Yeah. So, and then, just the team construction and the way they didn't do him any favors. That's for sure. And you think about, going back to Belichick, who, interestingly enough, Raheem Morris beat out Bill Belichick for that job, which is just incredible to think about.
Yeah.
And I think it's the right move. I think it's time for Bill Belichick to become an analyst, kind of like Roy Kent on Ted Lasso or something like that. Nice. Just kind of grunting and groaning and telling it like it is. But
great comparison.
Yeah, I think so. Proud of that one. So yeah, it's situations. It's I'm a man of 40 years old now. I'm a completely different person than I was in my late 20s and early 30s. I'm much more capable, and your prefrontal cortex develops. Your sense of who you are as a person changes over time, and so only time will tell. And going back to Belichick again is what I'm saying. What I was saying was, he goes and he gets the Patriots job. He's got quarterback Tom Brady. They want to win a bunch of Super Bowls. Tom Brady leaves. That situation changes. Belichick looks like a genius for a good chunk of that time, and then now the shine's worn off again, and it's just incredible how the coin flips and everything just changes. And good coaches lose jobs, bad coaches win games. Mike McCarthy's not a bad coach, but he took a team to the playoffs, and he's not one of the best coaches and he's doing just fine. So
because he has good coordinators.
Yeah, 100%. Well, on the Eagles, that's an interesting case there, where he lost both of his coordinators. Both of his coordinators are pointing in the right directions. They look like they got their teams going in a better place, and the Eagles aren't. And now they're talking about hiring Vic Fangio there, which oh boy.
I know. I think it's like done basically. Like he basically asked the Dolphins to like release him so he could go be closer to his family and sign with the Eagles. So,
and the reports out of Miami are that none of the players were sad to see him go either.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of been a trend with Vic Fangio. Is he certainly in today's modern football, he doesn't seem to be a very player-centric coach. And that was in Denver. That was a big thing. Like players just didn't like him. But anyway, which is the exact opposite with Raheem Morris, right? Everyone loves him.
Yeah.
So, and last thing on that, I think of even like us, right? Like running LAFB. Like I didn't know what the heck I was doing when we first started this, and knew stuff about sports, but now all of a sudden we figure out like trends and how to get like more people watching and reading and traffic and this and that and different sales tactics, and something you've learned throughout time. So Raheem Morris certainly throughout his coaching destinations has learned a lot, and it helps that he coached. I think it helped him a lot too, coaching under Sean McVay. I know McVay talked a lot about how much Raheem Morris meant to him, how much he meant to him specifically last year off the field, being that guiding force we talked about last episode. But I think it also helped Raheem, like being under, obviously winning a Super Bowl, but then being under the great Sean McVay, who's had one losing season his entire career, and how he operated ways, how he ran practices, what the scheduling like with players, how he connected with players, how he led his coaching staff. And so those are all things you got to learn. And I think he has, and that's why he got the second shot. And nothing but happy for him. Obviously bummed to see him go, which we'll talk about replacements here in a minute. But before we talk about Rams replacements, how many and who of Rams assistants do you think will go with Raheem? Because you got to think he'll take at least one or two, but how many do you think he will do?
I'm thinking probably just one. I think he's going to snag somebody off the offense. Zach Taylor's probably the one. That's the name on everybody's lips right now, anyway. And Nick Calia as well. I think it might be a candidate as well. I think that's the only guy. I mean, he didn't really. I don't think he brought in any of his guys. Maybe Jimmy Lake might be his DC. Perhaps they go way back, and it seemed like he was kind of the Morris guy that he brought in to not only help the Rams out, but rehabilitate Jimmy Lake's career. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm torn. I definitely see Zach Taylor, one of the offensive guys, going with the BOC. Seems like reports were yesterday that Taylor was the favorite, quote unquote, per sources. So I would not be shocked there at all. And I think obviously that makes sense. And it gives, Zach Taylor a nice promotion, and he goes with a familiar face that he knows how operates, that they're going to operate, as opposed to going to New England or a coach that he doesn't know very well. Defensively, it's like, which we're going to get to Rams DCs. I still think because McVay's done this, I think he's going to go outside the building for his DC. And so it wouldn't shock me then if Raheem brings a guy like Aubrey Pleasant or one of these other guys to be his DC, because they wouldn't be getting that promotion here in LA. Now, there's still a shot that, and you mentioned Jimmy Lake would be a very obvious one as well. So if McVay doesn't promote them, I could see, and I don't know what the timeline is going to look like, who would go first, but I'm sure they'll have a conversation like, hey, I don't want to, usually when these coaches leave, they're not trying to deplete the team they came from and just take everyone with them. But you usually take a couple just to help you establish that culture. So I wouldn't be shocked if he does take one off defensive guy to be his DC. Just because then he'll be, he wants someone that knows how to run his defense that he's run for 3 years, but allow him to still kind of oversee the entire head coaching operation. I think back to when Brandon Staley left the Rams to the Chargers, and you can remind me, I'm trying to think, the only one he took with him, I believe, so correct me if I'm wrong, was Joe Barry. And then Joe Barry ended up going with them, but before being there a week, Green Bay offered him their DC that had play calling duties, which Brandon Staley was going to keep play calling duties. So then he left because it was like a pseudo promotion. But he took a Rams defensive coach to be his DC. Was there anyone else? I don't think there was anyone else that Staley took. Do you remember?
Not my memory. It doesn't. I don't. I can't remember if anybody else went. Yeah, I think it was just Barry.
Yeah, which is, I think he tried to bring O'Connell, but McVay blocked him.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I don't think he took anyone else. So anyway, that being said, I think Raheem, I think he'll bring one defensive guy just to be his DC.
Yeah,
who that is?
That sounds about right. Let me ask you this question. So I've been thinking a lot about Mike LaFleur and his desires, his career path. Does he want to become an offensive play caller once again? Because McVay's the play caller of the offense.
Yeah.
Would McVay block that if Raheem wanted to take LaFleur?
That's a good question.
Because that's a lateral move.
Yeah. And if he did, like we think it was 3 years ago, but if he did block the Chargers from taking O'Connell, you would think he would do the same with LaFleur. But yeah, I don't know. But he hasn't done stuff like that. His brother, Matt LaFleur, he didn't block. He let him go to Tennessee to call plays and then become a head coach. So, I think, okay, let me say it like this. I think he would allow it because that would ensure, probably ensure that then he keeps Zach Taylor and makes Zach Taylor the OC.
Yeah.
But again,
that'd be a good
does he
move,
promote within? I don't know if he would do that.
Yeah. I don't know. But interesting McVay note. This is his 5th coach that will become a head coach. One of his coordinators becoming a head coach. 7 years, 5 head coaches out of that tree, which is just incredible. Just another testament to this organization.
So off the top of your head, I'm trying to think. So the 5 coaches you got, it was Raheem Morris. You got Zach Taylor, and have we been saying Zach Taylor the whole time and it's Zach Robinson with the Rams still?
Maybe.
I think we have. There's too many, but okay. Zach Taylor in Cincinnati.
Bengals, Cincinnati, yeah. Mike,
and then
Matt LaFleur
in Green Bay.
Staley.
Kevin O'Connell. And then it would have been Staley. So yeah, there's the 5. Crazy. Yeah. And there's probably going to be more. And how many coordinators around too? I mean, you got a lot of course. Shane Waldron, coordinator. You got, there's a bunch. We could probably go down the list, but we don't need to right now. But
Joe Evero, Thomas Brown.
Yeah. Thomas Brown, Evero. Yeah. So, okay. Well, that's a perfect transition then. So looking at Rams replacements, I'll ask you first straight up. Do you think they go in-house or do you think they go out of house?
The tail of the tape has always been out of house. So I'm just going to bet that they're going to continue with that tendency.
Yes.
What about you? Yeah. Same for you.
I agree. I think out of house. We've talked about it a bunch. I don't want to keep hammering it down, but it just seems like they instill this organizational culture, but they want to bring in different thought processes into the coordinators and then allow their position coaches to continue grooming and learning different systems or whatever that allows them to go on and, be successful. So you're not just stuck in like one box, if you will, in a system. Like, I think that's why that's why the Patriots potentially the Belichick tree has been so unsuccessful. One, I think part of it's personality. They just try to recreate the Patriot way everywhere, and it just doesn't work unless you have, Tom Brady. But B, I think it's because it's this one for 2 decades system, and if there's any stuff that gets thrown at them, they can't change out of that system. And where I think the Rams have been so good because they've had this turnover, but they keep having these different thoughts, different, changes, and they're not just stuck in one way. So anyway, long way of saying yes, I think they go out of house. So with that being said, who are some candidates you like out of house to take over the DC job?
Well, actually, my top 2 are in-house, out-of-house figures. So top 1, my number 1 is we're gonna go in the wrong direction. My number 1 is going to be bring back Brandon Staley. He had the number 1. The Rams defense was the best ever under him. Number 1 in yards, number 1 in points scored. 2020, he just comes in and he takes Wade Phillips's defense basically and elevates it. They bring in Leonard Floyd, who has 10.5 sacks that year, but other than that, you bring in Jordan Fuller in the draft. They just elevated he just elevated the defense into the best that they've ever seen. And I think, talking about rehabilitating careers, Brandon Staley needs a soft landing spot. He needs a place to go where he can learn how to be a head coach, because it didn't work out. Didn't work out for the Chargers.
Yeah, for whatever reason, which we've talked about a bunch on the network, not on the show, but in our Chargers coverage. But yeah, I mean, I think the guy is still a great defensive mind. It didn't work out, and what was interesting is one of the biggest issues with the Chargers was the defense. So that was the one I think, and a lot of fans are maybe a little nervous about the thought of bringing him back because he had the 1 year of greatness, but the Chargers defense, even with the talent they had, they were never not just a top defense. They were always a bottom defense. And, a lot of that I've talked about on shows, a lot of that I think was more so execution, but also I think it was kind of what we just talked about. It was that way of thinking, and there was no challenge in terms of changing that way of thinking. But when he's a DC, I think that's different because he can have that way of thinking, but then McVay is still the one that can override that and change things and force, they're not having groupthink because they have these different ideals and ideologies that I think could work. So I would be all for bringing Brandon Staley back. I really liked Brandon Staley. I still liked him as a Chargers coach. It was time definitely to move on. And obviously the Chargers upgraded with Harbaugh, but I think coming back as a DC and kind of, if the Rams want to turn into the Alabama of the pros of just, the rehabilitation center for failed coaches, but that are very talented and still bright, so be it. And, I think the team would welcome him back. I think the players that did play with him, which we're now looking at only a couple, Fuller, like you mentioned, Aaron Donald, and that might be it.
Yeah, that might be it.
Yeah, that might be it. Was Ernest Jones?
Ernest Jones in there. He was drafted in 21. John Johnson is a free agent, but I don't know. They might bring him back. Unlikely, but safety's a weird position for the Rams.
Well, the last thing I'll say quickly on, and then so you can think about it, your next candidate that you like, and then I'll throw some out. But the interesting, and we talked about this off air. We may have even brought it up a little bit on an episode. I can't remember, but there was conversation, not saying sources or anything, but there was some conversation and stuff about, when Staley was brought in by the Chargers, that the Chargers wanted to kind of create a Rams organizational structure or try to emulate, the success by doing things the way the Rams did things. I don't know how factual that is, but there's conversations that was kind of why they brought Brandon Staley as the head coach, but also was kind of the selling point from Brandon Staley about how to kind of build success because of everything he learned under McVay and the Rams. And then the conversations progress, and I'm just saying this is from what I've heard, and me and you have talked about it.
You have a pretty good source behind that.
That even though that was said, it was never backed up or carried out. So Brandon Staley was not able to get the players that he wanted in free agency or the draft that he felt fit his system. There may have been some pushback on certain coaching hires, positional hires, and whatnot. In that year one, and we're getting a little off topic, but don't worry, I'll bring it full circle here. In that year one, if I'm not mistaken, Joe Lombardi, who I still think was probably hated more than deserved, but he was, I believe, his third or fourth choice of OC. So it wasn't even his first choice as the OC. Obviously, Kevin O'Connell, I think, was one, and the Rams blocked that, but then I think he had one or two others even before. And you got to learn to adapt. So I'm not making that as an excuse, but just all of this being said, that Staley is seen as this failed experiment by the Chargers, and any Rams fans that fear him coming back as the DC, a big part of why he failed is potentially that he did not have the true support, backing, and resources that he was kind of promised, and so wasn't able to carry out his vision. Whereas if he came back to the Rams after what we saw in 2020 and after what we know of Sean McVay and Les Snead, he will certainly have his voice heard in the draft room, his voice heard in free agency of who he wants. His vision of the defense will be put to action instead of just being, words on a whiteboard and then nothing actually comes of it. And the GM, who was Tom Telesco down there, makes his own decision, not listens to what Staley wants. And we've seen the videos of like the Rams draft room, right? When they want someone that's all them collaborating, and Raheem can say, I want this guy. And Les is like, all right, let's go get him. Let's make it happen. It's like a very like, who do you want? And let me build that roster for you. And so long-winded answer of saying, I think Staley can be successful here again because the way the Rams run thing, he'll have full support.
Yeah. And, my hope is that Staley's influence would change McVay's outlook on going for it on fourth down just a little bit.
Ooh, there you go. That's a good point. We need to get more
Maybe
aggressive.
maybe that would translate a bit for Staley. So my second choice is again inside outside guy. Bring back Ejiro Evero. That's my number two. Since he's left, he hasn't had the opportunity to work for really good coaches. Yeah, he was under Nathaniel Hackett in Denver, and then Frank Reich, who, that's an interesting story in and of itself, but didn't pan out there in in Carolina. So yeah, I think that would be kind of a nice homecoming, and he's obviously an incredibly talented guy. So I think that's great. It would be a great hire.
I love that one, and he might actually be my first choice. But I don't know. Brandon said that might be my first. I don't know. I have a lot of. I think I'd be content with a lot of options. But yeah, Evero is great. Obviously went over to Denver as the DC and did a very good job in Denver. And then in Carolina, a little bit of a setback year, I would say, in terms of just defensive production. Again, I don't think that's all on him. I think it's, as we talked about Staley, there's a lot of other factors when you're DC, resources, who your head coach is, obviously then having an interim head coach, and whatnot. So what hurts him that as of today, he technically is still, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he can still be blocked by Carolina, even though they hired Canales as their head coach. Canales is going to decide who he wants to keep or if he's going to release the whole staff. So I believe as of now, he's technically still a Panthers employee. So the Rams would either have to get approved.
He's been blocked already from other interviews. So
yeah, he's been blocked already. And it was most of those probably early blocks, similar to what the Chargers did with Kellen Moore, was waiting till the head coach is hired to then have the head coach decide, am I keeping him or am I going elsewhere? So if Canales wants Evero as his DC, then that's that. Rams won't have a choice. If he decides to release the staff or release him, then I think the Rams absolutely should at least bring him back for, an interview and a talk. So the other things I've heard, and this I don't think would affect the Rams considering he was with the Rams forever, but he's kind of, and this isn't necessarily a report, so I don't want to put any like false information out there, but I've heard some things that he's very like loyal to certain coaches, and that's almost like hurt him in ways. Like he was very loyal to Nathaniel Hackett, and so that kind of burned some bridges. When he got fired, he came out and said some things and did this. And I don't think that would affect the Rams at all because the Rams know him. He was in the Rams organization. There was always good stuff there. So, but just another thought there that I heard.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. That's I haven't heard that yet before. So I don't know why he would be loyal to anybody in Carolina at this point. It's not like
No.
anybody's left, but I understand. And the situation there is from the ownership. That's not a place that I would want to work. So I mean, it's a
No.
much nicer place in LA, I would imagine, from
Yeah.
ownership and GM but he's captain of his own ship. So let's
Yeah. Sometimes there's that, and I'm not saying with him, but sometimes there's that pride that you want to like prove yourself away from where you've been successful. And so like, and this isn't I'm not saying him at all, but sometimes there's that mindset, right? Like McVay has always had the success. A lot of people will, even when you leave McVay, it's like you got the job because of McVay. And so then maybe there's that thought of like, I want to establish myself that I am a really, really good defensive coordinator without that. But I think it'd be a home run if he comes back to LA. I think it'd make a lot of sense. So who you got as number 3?
This one is outside. That's my first one. And that's Baltimore Ravens linebacker coach, Zach Orr.
Okay.
Just a great system coming from that place in Baltimore. And I think that, if you want to inject new ideas and other ideas, he's worked for, under Wink Martindale and now Mike McDonald there. So, just kind of new ideas coming into the building. That's kind of my angle on that one. Just obviously a fantastic system. Baltimore has been a defensive juggernaut for years and years. And, new ideas coming in.
Yeah, I think that's a great one. Any kind of coach you can get from the Ravens organization, especially defensively, it's I think a smart decision and something you would absolutely want to look at. So I like that one a lot. The other one I'll throw out is Joe Witt down in Dallas, defensive backs coach. Obviously we saw, we've seen Trevon Diggs, what he's kind of become, Deron Bland this year, what he became. So I think Joe Witt's a great position coach, coaching under Dan Quinn. I think Dan Quinn's one of the better DCs in football and a great leader as well. And Witt's been around the league for a long time. So he's a guy I could see potentially coming to LA, it'd be a new start, a new way of thinking, new mind, kind of the motto that we're going with. But seems like it could be a good glue guy that would fit in here with LA. And, it might, I don't want to say this in a bad way, but a guy that, might not garner head coaching attention as quick. So maybe you can hang on to him a little longer than, a one and done or a two and done kind of situation. Not that that's why you would hire a DC, but someone that maybe they could keep here in the building for a little longer.
Yeah, and Al Harris is also in that building. I thought that was an interesting candidate for the position as well. Defensive backs coach, former safety as well. Dallas's defense is an interesting case study because I mean Dan Quinn did so many amazing things there, but also kind of fell apart at times. So I mean it's not an indictment of either one of those candidates. all the candidates are going to have some flaws or come from even Raheem Morris with this defense was 20th ranked or something like that. So I think Dallas Cowboys organization as well is a good place to find good talent right now.
Yeah. Are there any I guess fired? Because I mean 8-team turnover. There's a lot of actual coaches that were DCs just this last year that are pretty much are available. Obviously, like we mentioned with Evero, like still hasn't been let go by the Panthers. There's probably others. I don't know about the Seahawks staff fully. But are there other DCs you like? Like I know different situation, but like a Wink Martindale or like some of these other former DCs just from this past season?
Well, I would be interested in Ron Rivera. I don't know if Ron Rivera would be interested in taking a DC position, but that's a fired
Yeah.
guy. Anybody else on your radar in that kind of realm?
Yeah, Ron Rivera would be interesting. Like you said, his DC that he fired, Jack Del Rio, has LA ties, went to USC. I'm not saying I like that choice, but that's another one that's been a DC, been in the league for a long time. As mentioned, an LA guy originally. I saw someone comment on one of our Twitter posts today, Bill Belichick, if he doesn't get a job, come be DC. I'll just say flat out that will absolutely not happen.
Mike
So the
Vrabel,
whole
kind of,
reason,
if you want to talk about that as well.
well, I was going to get to him. So,
Oh, sorry.
Belichick will not happen. Because, how long as he's coached, the career he's had, he's not doing anything but being a head coach. He doesn't need to go reestablish himself as a DC. And there's reports that the reason why it's cooled on him and why he didn't, for instance, get the Falcons job is because he wanted full control, like he had in New England. So it was a power issue there, which he's not going to go be a DC for. So Mike Vrabel is an interesting one because I don't think he needs to be a DC. He's definitely established himself, and I'm honestly shocked if he doesn't get a job this cycle. I was still pretty surprised that they moved on from him in Tennessee. But I don't see him. I mean, I could be way wrong on this, but I don't see him being the type of guy that would want to take a year to go do like TV and then get in the back into coaching like a Sean Payton. Like, I just feel like he is a coach for now. He's still fairly young and hasn't been a coach for that long. So I could see him being willing to go be a DC for 1 year and then getting back in the head coaching cycle next year. I just can't see him sitting out a year from coaching. I could be way off on that, and it could certainly happen. But if he was just going to be a DC for 1 year, what better place than to do it in LA under McVay? And that would be a slam dunk hire.
No, yeah, I love it. And he's such a fun culture guy. You can compare him to like a Wink Martindale or something like that, or Vic Fangio. But just he's more in that vein of a Dan Campbell kind of a guy, real team player. Really, in the Raheem Morris vein as well. And yeah, anytime you can kind of add somebody with that kind of real coaching experience, I think that's great. And if you want to think internal, I think I've already mentioned Jimmy Lake, so I think he would probably be the top internal candidate. I just wanted to throw that out there if they were going to go with anybody, because he's not not internal because he just joined in the staff this last season and just has a lot of relevant coaching experience a la Mike Vrabel. So that's why I bring him up now.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you, and that's how we can end the show here. We were going to talk about or coach of the year and assistant coach of the year, but we ran out of time and just doing this. Maybe we'll mention it really fast in the last minute. So you can do this quickly so we can talk about that really quick. Of the in-house candidates, and you basically answered it, but basically I think the top ones that people would think of would be Aubrey Pleasant, Jimmy Lake, or Chris Beek. So of those three, the one with the best shot you think to be a DC would be Jimmy Lake.
Yeah, I think he's probably the only one I would elevate at this point. Aubrey Pleasant's great. There's a scene that's stuck in my head where he was it was on television. The Lions are playing, and he was just yelling at one of his players. I can't remember the guy's name now. He was one of their top draft picks of several seasons ago, and he just never panned out. Can't think of his name, unfortunately. But he was just like going after him. And I get that coaches have to do that, but it's just stuck in my head that I don't like that. I don't like that.
Sole reason. That's it.
Yes.
But no, I would agree with you. I hope those guys are retained, certainly. Aubrey Pleasant, I think, has been great for the secondary since he's been back, and what he did with this secondary unit overall, I think, is great. But yeah, I think Jimmy Lake, to me, internally feels like the best candidate to take over the DC, because he does bring in that differing thought process, right? Being with Washington for so long as their secondary coach, then their defensive coach, then their head coach, and only with the Rams for 1 year. So it'll be interesting. And, the time starts now. I'm sure it'll be probably a couple weeks, but, last year they moved kind of quietly making their coaching hires. You remember with Mike LaFleur and some of the other guys that came in. So I'm sure it'll be like that, very similar, but, certainly by the combine, they'll be fully staffed. probably well before that too. So, and we'll have full coverage here on the Rams Skinny of all of that. So let's get out of here with this. Just released yesterday, the NFL awards nominees. Coach of the Year came out. We're only going to have time for this one probably. So Coach of the Year came out. You had Dan Campbell. You had John Harbaugh. You had Kyle Shanahan. You had DeMeco Ryans. And you had Stefanski of Cleveland were the 5. Let me just get your thoughts first. No McVay. Is that a snub?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's some good coaches on there. I mean, Kyle Shanahan's his offense is clipping. It's really good. Can't take anything away from him. Dan Campbell, obviously the turnaround, the story of the Lions has just been the narrative just writes itself. It's beautiful. It's but you think about the other guys on there, like Stefanski, there were people in the media that were saying that the Rams were going to win 2 games this year. And he made them a playoff team. That's just, I mean, that's the case right there. I can say it any other way, but football is about winning games, and he won a bunch of games that he wasn't supposed to win. He outperformed. And you think about Stefanski, a bunch of different quarterbacks in there, but like they set themselves up really poorly by hiring or bringing in Deshaun Watson, just with all of his legal troubles, but also hadn't played football in a very long time, basically sat out, 2 years from playing football. So, they made their bed. So those are just kind of my cases that he should at least be in the contest of the top 5,
Yeah, I think it's robbery. I mean, absolutely, for everything you said, when you go down the list, Dan Campbell, deserving. DeMeco Ryans, definitely deserving, with a rookie quarterback, a team that had the 2nd overall pick and brought them to the playoffs. I think Stefanski is deserving just because 4 different quarterbacks in the same division as Baltimore and still, only with 5 losses and made the playoffs with all that turnover and bringing a quarterback off the couch to kind of lead them there. So for me, and I'm not saying John Harbaugh and Kyle Shanahan aren't deserving, because those are the 2 best teams in football, and which is why they probably made it. I just look at those rosters that each have and compared to the roster the Rams had, and all 3 of them made the playoffs, but the Rams coach was the one left off. That because it's a regular season award. It's not based on how far you go in the playoffs. It's when the season's over, and all 3 of those guys are in the playoffs, and the Rams. John Harbaugh has the MVP in Lamar Jackson. Kyle Shanahan has a potential MVP in Christian McCaffrey and Brock Purdy, both nominated. He had 2 MVP candidates. John Harbaugh, phenomenal defense. Kyle Shanahan, phenomenal defense. Rams have a roster that was given 2 to 5 wins, and they win, make the playoffs and end up winning whatever it was, 10 games. So,
10 games,
robbery to me. I don't understand it at all. We don't got time. We're running out, but Raheem Morris also snubbed, not on the assistant awards. Guy's a head coach now, so clearly probably should have been. And so I don't understand that one either, but whatever. Well, I don't think the coaches really care that much, but I don't get it. Sean McVay for sure should have been a finalist.
Definitely. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's unfortunate.
Yeah, but with that being said, that's all the time we got for here on the Rams Skinny. Thank you all for hanging out with us. Congrats to Coach Morris, head coach down in Atlanta. We'll have plenty more coverage on all of that here at the Rams Skinny and always at LA Football Network, LAFBnetwork.com. For Skinny T, I'm Ryan Dyrud. Everyone have a great weekend. We'll talk to you all again on Monday.